Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live Sunday morning ahead of free agency. It's going to be a great couple days. Cannot wait to see how it unfolds. And we will have you covered for all of it over the next week or so. So, as always, my name is Steven. I am your host. And joining me to talk about this upcoming free agency period are Tyler and Alex. Tyler, we'll start with you, man. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. We started very, very well last week with that Khalil Mack trade. We're kind of at a almost down here at a low, but tomorrow should bring us back up with some sort of big move, I think. So hoping for something big. Hopefully we get one more awesome move.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we'll get a couple big swings on there, depending on really how you define big names and all that. But I think we'll get a couple big swings. Uh, Man, Alex been having a great couple weeks. We get the Khalil Mack trade, James Harden, Carson Wentz, and then we get Brandon Staley talking about his all-time favorite athlete, Rafa Nadal. So, Alex, how you doing, man?
It was so weird because I just stared at my phone because usually I see like tennis journalists in my notifications tweeting about Nadal, and I see the Chargers Twitter account tweet at Rafa Nadal. I'm like, what the hell is this? And it was like what 10, 11 p.m. last night.
Yeah.
And I just watched it. And I was like, oh wow. And then I saw a picture of them together, and I'm like, this is really cool. So I had to wear the Spain shirt for Nadal today and Staley, but that was a great crossover. Happy Justin and Derwin had fun at the match too. But
yeah. I saw somebody had tagged one of the around the football podcast guys saying that Justin and Derwin were there watching doubles or something like that. So, educating themselves on some tennis. I know Justin's a big golf guy. I wonder if he's a big tennis guy too.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That would be fun to see. If we ever get Staley on the podcast, God forbid, we're going to talk about Nadal for a really long time.
Yeah, someone find out if Justin's a big tennis guy, because I think the idea of a 6'6", 250-pound quarterback playing tennis is kind of funny to me. But yeah, so we'll talk about a bunch of free agency rumors and predictions today. So it's going to be a really fun episode. Wanted to start the show on the latest in terms of the Chargers' journey for finding a defensive tackle. So a couple days ago, there were rumblings that the Alex's Eagles, were trying to trade Fletcher Cox, and we were kind of trying to connect the dots, and then Mr. Schultz over there connected them to the Chargers. So figured we would discuss this today, and specifically asking Alex here, how realistic do you think it is that the Eagles do trade Fletcher Cox? And really, do you think he has anything left in the tank?
Oh, I mean, they're trading him, I think, 100%. They were going to do it at the deadline last year, and then they didn't. But to me, it just makes too much sense. It's weird to say that it makes too much sense, and they absorb like a $30 million cap hit or something.
But they don't care about dead cap, man.
That's the thing. Like people kept bringing up the dead cap. I'm like, they took $33 million dead cap from Carson Wentz last year just to get him off the team. Just to get a first round pick to get him on the team, they were willing to absorb that. And they already have dead cap for Malik Jackson and Ertz, so they'll just pile it on and give us future picks, right? And that's kind of like how their team is built. They're paying like 5 guys over 10 million, and then everybody else is, Hurts, Devonta Smith, kind of salaries where they're on those rookie contracts. So, I don't think they mind that. As far as what the compensation would be, I would guess like a 3rd or 4th round pick, but I don't know. In terms of what it would be there, would have to consult someone who has better knowledge of that. But when I saw that they could get the cap hit down to 5.3 in that tweet from, I think, a guy over at Spot Track, I just thought that made a lot of sense, and that made me think about it first. And then Sean Phillips was like, oh, I've been hearing about this, and then you get the Schultz thing. So I just thought it was interesting. As far as how much he has left in the tank, I mean, I don't know if I think he can still play a very serviceable level of football. 2021 was down from where it was in 2020, but to me, you're getting him on an expiring deal anyway. He's probably not going to be here for the long term. So really, you're just getting, probably the last, prime year of Fletcher Cox, if you will. And so for me, I would kind of swing that trade, but that depends if they want to go after Hicks or Sebastian Joseph Day and what their other plans are as well. But when I saw that they could get that number down, it just made a lot of sense to me that they would be in on that. I do probably think he ultimately goes to another team, though.
Yeah, I first of all, in terms of his ability, and there's a super chat from Theory. We'll get to that in a second about some restructurings. But in terms of Fletcher Cox's ability, like his numbers were down a little bit last year for sure. But there was also a point where, he was having a tough time in the defense in terms of figuring out his role and what Jonathan Gannon really wanted him to do and was hoping for him to be able to be more aggressive. And then I think after the trade deadline passed, that was able to happen. He had a good down the stretch of the season for the Eagles. So I think he still has some left in the tank. Obviously, I don't think he's, 2018, 2019 Fletcher Cox, where he's just this complete game wrecker. But, I tweeted this out, but I think people kind of have to understand in terms of these pass rushing defensive tackles, like all of their production is going to be up from where it was, whether it's Akeem Hicks, whether even if it's Sebastian Joseph Day, Fletcher Cox, whoever, because of the attention that Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are going to get from these teams, they're all going to be more productive. So if Fletcher Cox were the choice, right? I wouldn't be too surprised if he came in and had, 50 total pressures, 8-9 sacks, and had a really good resurgent season for the Chargers.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either. The compensation and what the Eagles end up taking on is definitely going to swing things. If the Chargers get like a $5.3 million cap hit this year, like spot track, however you say it, Arjun is not a fan of them. It's more over the cap, and they don't tend to use them because they tend to be a bit off. So how it actually works out, I don't know. To me, you're just you went for Khalil Mack, who's got injury concerns and he's slightly older. Joey Bosa, he's not old, but he's not exactly 22. To me, even with the production, going out and getting Fletcher Cox and spending, probably a good pick on him, it sounds like if the Eagles are going to absorb so much of the cap hit or the dead cap or whatever, it sounds like they want big compensation. I think that's what Schultz said. To me, that's like second round pick, maybe even next year's first round pick, kick that first round pick down the line or something. Hopefully not. But, I just worry that this team is going to be too old, too top heavy, and forget that they also need to, have 53 people on the roster. Like we've always been saying, like the best 15 players on this roster can kick the shit out of anybody else. But when it comes to time to face the Houston Texans and you're down most of your starters, you lose. Like you just are out of players. Now, I think the Chargers will be much better this year than losing to the Texans. Cross my fingers. But I would rather they go younger with Sebastian Joseph Day, or at least cheaper in terms of total compensation with Akeem Hicks, and find ways to acquire more players, because they're going to be a very strong top heavy team, it seems like, this year, but they still have a lot of depth to have to churn through. And I really think they could make a big push this year, but they also need to get to next year as well and the following year. And I worry about them giving too much up for a player that's just a bit older, when like you said, you can probably get players that are going to have career years next to Bosa and with Khalil Mack. Sorry, I forgot his name. So surprising. So I think I'd rather go a route where you sort of manage the interior of the defensive line with some lower sort of cost options that are maybe not as old, and make it work like that.
Yeah, so Schultz, his exact phrasing that he used for the compensation was significant. So I doubt it's a first or second round pick, given Fletcher Cox's age, and Alex mentioned his cap hit, his expiring contract. I feel like you're looking at a day 3 pick. Personally, I'd be pretty surprised if it were a top 3 pick, in my opinion.
Yeah,
fourth rounder significant?
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't think no one's going to give up a first round pick for Fletcher Cox. First round pick on an expiring deal, like that doesn't make any sense to me. A significant could be like a day 2 pick, but I guess they don't have that anymore this year unless they want to trade the round 3 one too and just go full less need. But to me, it sounds like it would be a third or a fourth. I mean, people are going to say that it's going to be 40 million, and that's what the Eagles are going to take on. But like their whole thing is we're just going to get picks and stack rookie contracts, right? So the reason that Wentz was different is because he plays quarterback, and that's when they traded him, got a first round pick for him. But to me, I mean, Cox is kind of going to get a contract next year with some other team. So you're either dealing him now or you're getting nothing for him. So to me, even if it means significant, maybe it's like 2 day 3 picks, something like that, which, I could also see why people would be against that. I'm not for it or against it. I would be excited if it happened, but, I definitely get the idea of going younger with a Sebastian Joseph Day and getting some guy. I do think that when it comes to age, and people talk about this with Akeem Hicks too, like, I guess the age part of it doesn't matter as much to me because, Telesco's really made his intentions clear. We're just getting one of these guys, for 1 to 3 year kind of length time period for these defensive tackles. And they're going to play next to Mack and Bosa, during this window. But you're also not going to probably sign a guy to like a 4-year deal or, really develop a defensive tackle for the long term here. So that's why, to me, age isn't as much of a concern when it comes to Hicks and Cox. I guess you can talk about that with the general decline, but to me those guys at least have 2 years of like good production left in the tank when I look at both of them.
Yeah, I definitely think they have good production, and to me the thing about Hicks, if there is a concern, it's the injuries that he's kind of battled through. And again, I kind of expect that signing to happen, but Fletcher Cox has missed 3 games since 2013. Like, Fletcher Cox is as durable and dependent as they come. And, of course, I tweeted that out yesterday, and somebody was like, oh, Chris Harris never missed any games. It's like, you really never know with these players once they hit 30. But, I mean, Fletcher Cox's resume says he's missed 3 games since 2013. And so I do think that matters. And it's not like this is going to be the only defensive tackle that they pursue as one of these older guys, right? Like, I think you could still get a younger player in there. Jerry Tillery is still young. And then I think you probably are looking at a draft pick of some kind and to kind of round out the group. So it's not like they're going to get 3 super old defensive tackles and run it back that way. Like, there's going to be youth on the interior as well.
Yeah, and I just think in terms of the compensation as well, Thomas Parts is in the chat. Cowboys got a 5th for Amari Cooper yesterday, and I would personally pay a lot more.
It was a pick swap too.
Yeah, a pick swap, right? So if we're talking about significant compensation for Fletcher Cox, maybe Howie Roseman can move a few things, but I don't think that he's really going to snag even a day 2 pick for him. I think it's more than likely going to be some kind of combination of day 3 picks or whatever. I just think with a guy left on a 1-year deal, you're not going to get much for him, like we saw with the Cowboys yesterday, because they threatened to cut Amari Cooper and then were surprised that they had no leverage in a trade for Amari Cooper. Which, congrats to Stephen Jones, really nailing it there. But yeah, no, I'm not, I think DJ Jones is another good option. I ultimately think they go the free agency route as opposed to, another big trade. If it is a big trade, I would expect it to be in the secondary, like, has kind of been reported. But, I wouldn't mind Cox at all, of course. Fuck! Shit! Damn it! Oh no!
It's okay.
I
mean, it's his name. It's his name.
Oh, stepped in it again.
You're good. It's his name, and it's whatever. It's
wouldn't mind Cox at all.
I think the takeaway here in terms of them being linked to Mr. Fletcher is that they're really exploring all avenues at the defensive tackle position, and I think that can also be said about the cornerback position too. So I do expect them to make a bigger move at the defensive tackle position, whether that's trading for Fletcher or signing Sebastian Joseph Day. I think Folu Fatukasi is an interesting one too. I think it was Jeremy Fowler was reporting that he was going to have a strong market despite not really having a ton of social media buzz. And, it's really funny. Like I follow a lot of Broncos people and Raiders people, of course. And like all of us have the same free agency targets. Like all of us want our respective teams to sign Sebastian Joseph Day or Fatukasi or somebody. So it's going to be really interesting to see, but I do expect them to really go after a run stuffing defensive tackle and maybe a expensive run stuffing defensive tackle.
Nah, I'm still stuck on the Alex thing.
No, you can let all your jokes flow, man. I mean, I really put myself in that position, but I feel like maybe we should move on from defensive tackle talk. Do we want to talk about the corner we're going to spend $80 billion on?
Yeah, so we can move on to the corner stuff. I think there's been a ton of smoke, more so than since the days have passed since our last episode between the Chargers and JC Jackson. I do want to clarify that tweet that I sent out yesterday of that article was specifically from a former agent saying what he as an agent would ask as JC Jackson's representative. I don't think his actual market is going to be $22 million, but we'll see. So like I said, there has been a lot more smoke recently between the two. Apparently somebody had a little bit of a conspiracy theory run and found out that some guy was at the Bahamas with JC Jackson, and JC Jackson supposedly told him that he was going to be a Charger. I don't believe that at all for a second, but there is a ton of smoke. I think for me personally, with the JC Jackson thing, right now it feels kind of Brian Dable-y, Tom Brady-ish, like kind of too good to be true with all of the people saying that it's going to happen. Maybe that's just me kind of overthinking it. I think JC Jackson is a great player. I would be in favor of the signing. I'm just kind of skeptical right now of everything coming out and so many people saying, hey, Chargers, hey, JC Jackson. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just a little skeptical right now that it actually happens.
Yeah. First of all, everyone who keeps messaging me, tell me if it's JC Jackson. I don't know. And stop messaging me. I won't tell you anyway. Even if I knew, I don't. But I think, like, who is it? Charvarius Ward? Like, they're going to go after a corner. Like, to me, everything that I gathered yesterday is that, multiple people tell this one person that it sounds like a he said, she said. They're going after someone in the secondary, and that person's going to get a bag. They've always wanted to add a corner. That wasn't a doubt, but they were possibly going to draft one at 17 or sign one in free agency. Then you do the Khalil Mack trade, which means, okay, now we should focus on our back end and our secondary. Then the Broncos trade for Russell Wilson. And so now it's like, okay, we should probably go get our corner right now. So, like, I just think that I don't know who else would be the player that's a big name in the secondary getting a bag, unless it's Charvarius Ward or maybe it's Darius Williams. It's all the signs to me point to JC Jackson. And whereas Brian Dable was kind of what we wanted, and then what Adam Schefter tweeted, I feel like everything that we've actually figured out and gathered and everything that's pointing to this makes more sense than Dable to the Chargers and just like, oh, Schefter tweeted it. And maybe there were other people guessing it as well. But this just feels stronger. This feels more legitimate. And no one was telling us about, Dable last year. Whereas I feel like this year,
that's true.
People are pointing to JC. Like, we didn't have this information last year. And the idea that someone's going to get a bag in the secondary, whoever it is, like, it really does sound like it's JC Jackson. Like, I don't know who it is, but it sounds like it's JC Jackson to me.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird because, and maybe this is our own bias in the Twitter sphere that we live in, but I really haven't heard another team on JC Jackson at all. Like, it just
there's
feels
been a little bit of Raiders talk, but not much.
Maybe a little bit of Raiders, but it's really just been, oh, well, he's splitting and he's leaving, and it seems like the only team that's consistently come up in all these reports is the Chargers, which is a little bit weird. I don't know what to think about the Dable thing, and that kind of does give me some pause, because usually when we hear blockbuster things about the Chargers, it's just like, oh, this blockbuster thing happened and it's done now, right? Like when Brandon Staley was hired, like when Khalil Mack was traded. It just happens, and there's usually very little buzz about it. I wouldn't go as far as to say the Chargers don't leak things at all, but they generally are pretty tight-lipped on this stuff. So it is weird that so many Jackson reports have gotten out. Maybe that's just, his agent kind of doing some, work for him. That could obviously be the case. That could obviously be Tom Telesco or someone within the Chargers. But to me, I do think it's a little weird that we've heard this much about him. But maybe there is also some, ammunition for the Chargers kind of trying to push his market up and then go after a Ward or a Gilmore instead. I don't know.
Yeah, in terms of it being a big name, I think that means JC Jackson or Stephon Gilmore. I think Charvarius Ward is a really underrated, promising corner. And I think Carlton Davis is in that conversation as well. But I wouldn't necessarily classify them as big names. And I mean, maybe the source here does, but that's just kind of how I interpret it. So when I heard big name in the back end, and my mind went to JC Jackson or Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, I could see that. Shoot, someone wrote something in. I missed. I was going to answer the question. Never mind. I can't find it. The thing is, they with defensive tackle as well. That's why we started with it too. They have Jerry Tillery, Brandon Fajoko, and sure Joe Gaziano. They're gonna add a defensive tackle because that's all they have. Or if they just bring back Justin Jones, I guess. Same thing with corner. They have two corners. They have two sort of starting corners, and Staley basically admitted that Davis is not a starting corner. It's going to be somebody. It's going to be one of these bigger name perceived CB1s. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to address as well before we get to Theory's question about restructuring. Um, a lot of people have said like, oh, like we're moving Asante to the slot, like that's going to devalue him, or like you're worried about his long-term role. I think the person who kind of gets devalued, like Tyler's alluding here, is Michael Davis. So I think, the Chargers are going to play a lot of nickel, so they're going to have three corners on the field. But I think we'll see a very similar role as to what Chris Harris was doing when he was healthy, in that he, in base packages, is going to be the outside corner. And then in nickel packages, you bring Davis off the bench and Asante moves to the slot. So Asante is going to be their starter. They really like him. They really like his ability. He showed that he can be productive. Like Asante is going to be a starter. I think the player who kind of moves into a supporting role is Davis, because it doesn't really sound like Staley has a ton of faith in him in terms of his ability right now. And at some point, the whole like developmental potential thing kind of goes away. Like he's going to be 27 by the start of football season, I think. So I'm not worried about Asante Samuel Jr.'s role at all. He's going to be a starter. He's going to play as many snaps as he can possibly handle. So just wanted to get that out there.
The only people I was told the only people that are safe in the secondary are Derwin James and Asante Samuel Jr. That's it. So we'll see. Obviously, if you're drafted, you probably hold more weight there, of course. But those are the only two guys that are safe.
Yeah, and I would just say they built that Michael Davis contract that way for a reason. I mean, it was really a 2-year deal that in the third year, just looking it up right now, but they basically saved $7 million by cutting him, like we talked about earlier this offseason. So, this is, of course, after 2022. But, that kind of showed you the confidence they have in him. It's like, okay, well, you can be our stopgap guy for 1 or 2 years and we'll see if you develop. And, if you can become a true CB1, they gave him that opportunity. And it's pretty clear that we're in a different spot with all these JC Jackson rumors or getting a cornerback in the draft, whatever it is. They don't see Michael Davis as a true CB1. But, if you do get a JC Jackson, can Michael Davis be your CB2 for a year? Sure. Right. Like I'm fine with that. And moving Asante Samuel Jr. to the slot in general, and it would make their depth seem better at cornerback if you do get a real top end starter, whether that's in the draft or in free agency. So for me, it was always just that was kind of how they valued him. And a lot of people, we did do a little bit of like CB1 hype at the time because 2020 was such a great year for Michael Davis. But 2021 was what it was. Did have some injuries. But he kind of showed you what his ceiling, I think, as a corner is. And so, that's a very good CB2. I wouldn't mind having him. But I think that the Chargers with that contract showed you how they valued their guys, just like they did with Mike Williams this week, just like they've every other contract, right? If they give a guy a contract, then that's how they see him. And so the cap hits work out to the point where they can cut him next year. And so that's why I think Michael Davis is just kind of on the outside looking in long term.
Yeah, and so go ahead, Tyler.
No, just last thing for me about JC Jackson, if it's JC Jackson, and the pitch for him is that, the Chargers, so Derwin James, Nasir Adderley, Michael Davis, and Asante Samuel Jr., I think they totaled 5 interceptions last year. JC Jackson, 8 last year, I think 22 over the last 3 years. I just think when you look at the problems of this team, what's the biggest issue? There's issues on offense, but the biggest issue on offense was kind of just the defense. The Chargers being second in points per drive and yards per game. I think they were end up 5th in points per game. But, some of the guys that were ahead of them, like the Cowboys and the Buccaneers, they had 20 more drives on the season because their defense just kind of took some things away. And you look at the Bengals and the way they were able to advance in the postseason, it wasn't really because of Joe Burrow and the offense. It was the defense taking the ball away. I think they had like 6 interceptions that ended up on like the opposing side territory, whatever it was. I think the Chargers are looking for that. So JC Jackson with those interceptions, they just brought in Khalil Mack. They had Joey Bosa. Khalil Mack had set a record for his career high in strip sacks with Brandon Staley. Brandon Staley comes in with Joey Bosa. What does he do? Set a career high in strip sacks. So now you have JC Jackson who can get you 7-8 picks a year. 2 guys that had career years in strip sacks under, Brandon Staley. Now you pair them together. You kind of keep this offense intact. You just give them half a drive more per game. And I think you could get so much better like that. So that's like the last pitch I would have for JC Jackson. I think those turnovers in particular are worth it for them.
Yeah, I was reading someone shared an article with me written by a New England beat writer of like why the Patriots aren't in on bringing JC Jackson back. And it was like, well, he gave up 8 touchdowns last year. And it was like, okay, but he had 8 interceptions. Like, people were shitting on Trayvon Diggs all year because he was giving up a lot of yards, but it's like, you got 9 interceptions. Like, I'll take that any day of the week. Like, I think, in this specific scheme, whoever they get at corner is going to have more help. That's kind of been my thing with Charvarius Ward, who's been very productive and kind of been an underrated player in Kansas City. Like, that man is on an island all game long for the Chiefs because Steve Spagnuolo loves to blitz and send 8 guys to the quarterback. So, whoever they get at corner is going to have more help. It's going to give them more opportunities. And I do think that there's going to be some positive regression there. Like, Derwin James dropped like 3 gimme interceptions. Like, that's not going to happen again next year. But, taking that and just saying, like, instead of relying on that, we're just going to go out and solve that by getting a JC Jackson, I think makes a lot of sense, just like adding Khalil Mack does. So, of course, they're focused in on, stopping the run and getting better like that. But to me, like, if they do sign JC Jackson, to me, it sounds like the first priority was getting more turnovers and getting him and getting Khalil Mack on the same team.
Absolutely. So last thing, because Arjun he tweeted out the contract for JC Jackson that he's predicting. And obviously Arjun seems to know what he's talking about. So he currently has it at 4 years, 74 million with a cap hit the first 2 years, 2022 being 14 million, the following year being 16, and then 21 and 23 after that. So it's going to be a big number, just like Mike Williams, but the way it's structured, I think, will matter most. So he has him about $15 million APY over the next 2 seasons in terms of cap hit. And then as far as the guarantees go, no guarantees after the second year of the contract. So it's really like a 2-year, $30 million deal, and it'll escalate in the future, but no guarantees after the second year.
Yeah, so like you said, that's a very similar structure to Mike Williams' contract. That's really how the Chargers just do business. Like, they're so smart with manipulating the cap that way and, saving themselves and putting in escape hatches. So I think that definitely makes a lot of sense. So I wanted to get to Theory super chat question here. As always, we do really appreciate all of the super chat questions. He says, any chance we restructure Bosa and Allen for more cap savings this year? So according to Over the Cap, if the Chargers wanted to restructure Joey Bosa's contract, this would be a max restructure. They would free up $15 million in cap space. Keenan Allen doing the exact same thing would be $10.2 million in cap space. They could do some other restructuring as well. Like restructuring Austin Eckler would save $2.3 million. Restructuring Matt Filer would be $2.3 million. So they can free up some money if they wanted to restructure Michael Davis. I feel like that would kind of be a moot point since you're probably considering cutting him next year. That's another $3 million. So if the Chargers wanted to do something like this, they certainly have the path to go out and do it. They've just never really done it with their star players. Like, in terms of restructuring, it's been like Denzel Perryman, Eddie Royal, Travis Benjamin, like players who are more in the supporting roles. And so I think the chances of them restructuring specifically Bosa and Allen is low, but I think we could see them restructure somebody in the supporting levels, like a Matt Filer kind of thing instead.
Yeah, I don't think there will be much restructuring to do. And also the Chargers have never really had to restructure, I guess, in the modern Telesco era. Because like when Rivers got that contract extension in 2015, that was like big money at the time. But, while quarterbacks were getting 40 million, then he was still on 22, right? So they didn't really ever have to restructure much there. Now Justin Herbert's on a rookie deal. So I think it's much like Arjun says, they're not going to restructure until they have to. And Allen's contract ends the year that they have to pay Herbert. Bosa's is 1 year into Herbert's new deal. So, I really don't think they're going to restructure till they have to. Like, yeah, $25 million would be fun to play with this offseason, but they also have enough money to the point where they can do things this season past signing JC Jackson. They can go further than that if they want. So, yeah, I don't think it was going to happen. I do want to mention thank you to Brett, who has already clipped out the Cox clip and put it on Twitter. Thank you.
Someone already did that.
Did they really? Good job, whoever that is. I'm gonna give you a follow for sure. We'll send you a free Manscaped t-shirt or something.
Wait, is that Brett?
It was both. It was Brett.
Brett, nice. Brett that's done the graphics. Okay, cool.
Yeah, graphics we got to pay for, but Cox clip outs, those are free. Those are on the house. Thanks a lot, Brett. I completely agree with you guys, and honestly, I just defer to Arjun in this case. If it doesn't seem like the Chargers are going to restructure, and frankly, it might not even be the best idea for them to restructure. It's not as simple as restructuring everyone and paying everyone only $5 million. Like Arjun
Yeah.
seems to lay it out where it's just not really what they're going to do. So I defer to him in that case. And if he doesn't think they're going to do it, I don't think they're going to do it.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think this is a good point by Kevin Kernick. Bosa would be the only one to restructure. You have no problem paying Joey down the line. He's a cornerstone. Keenan's getting older, no long-term commitment. So I do think that's fair. Like if they wanted to restructure Joey Bosa, I think from a player perspective, some of them seem to like that, right? Like you get a lot more money up front, and then your game checks are just significantly smaller. So they could certainly restructure Joey Bosa, free up a little bit here and there if they wanted to, change some of that into a signing bonus or a roster bonus or something like that. But we haven't really seen them do that. Like they don't necessarily need to. So like I said, I feel like if they're going to restructure somebody, it'd probably be a supporting player.
Yeah, I agree. Just random because it was sort of while we were on the show. The Saints and Panthers have made offers for Deshaun Watson, so keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Alex Silva, another super chat, says, I can see them using most of the cap on free agency and then do restructures for their draft money. Yeah, and I think also like the Derwin James contract is going to add some money into that, cap total too. So maybe like Daniel Popper has tweeted out like his budgets for like in season stuff like that. Maybe because you are extending Derwin James down the road, you can kind of push that right now and then say, hey, like extending Derwin James is going to give us, I think it's $3.5 million in cap space this year. Maybe that's kind of what we use for in-season budget as opposed to planning for that right now.
Oh, $3.5 million. Okay, I wasn't sure what the number was, but that sounds. I mean, that pays for Donald Parham's tender and Dennis Kelly and Ode Ibushi coming back. So
it's actually more. It's over the cap has it at 6.4 if they extend him. So that's like 100% of the in-season budget.
Nice. That's perfect.
I don't think the Chargers have any of these contracts, but there's also those ones that become like easier to move off of, like June 1st or whatever it is. So that could also be a time where the Chargers play around with the salary cap a little bit. But yeah, like to me, they could restructure Bosa if that really does give him 15 million more or whatever it is. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but to me, don't restructure until you have to, or you'll end up like the Saints right now.
Yeah, with all those void money contracts. So this is an interesting one too. I did see this yesterday. Apparently, Bobby Wagner, who is an LA native, is determined to play in LA. And I did see that somebody went on, I can't remember which reporter went on a radio show in Seattle and said that he's expecting him to play in LA. They did not specify Rams or Chargers. Schultz has kind of indicated that the Chargers would be in on Bobby Wagner as well. So there is at least some smoke between Bobby Wagner and the Chargers. What I've always said is that I feel like, depending on the contract that he's looking for, I just don't see the Vic Fangio tree really going out and valuing the linebacker position to the point of paying up for it in free agency. Certainly, they've drafted players high like a Patrick Willis, like Roquan Smith, but they've never really gone out of their way to sign a big name free agent like this. So he might want to play in LA. I could certainly see that being the Rams and kind of sticking it to the Seahawks, as that tweet he sent out on Friday afternoon was pretty damning for the Seattle Seahawks. So I could see him, following the Richard Sherman pathway and signing with a division rival, this case, the Rams. But I'd be pretty surprised if he signs with the Chargers at this point.
Yeah, I don't buy that he's going to sign with the Chargers. And if they're not going to keep Kyzir White, I suppose Bobby Wagner would be an upgrade. But like you said, I just don't see it happening with Telesco and his history, with Staley and his defense. Like I just don't buy that. Same reasons I don't expect Kyzir White to be back, among other things. But I don't think Bobby Wagner. But him going to the Rams and sticking it to the Seahawks, could totally see that. Like I know they similarly don't pay linebackers as well, but the ability to go to a contender, a little bit of a lower cap hit, probably a little bit of a discount just to go to a contender and stick it to the Seahawks, I could totally see that happening.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of like the linebackers in general on this team because we do expect Kyzir White to be gone. And then I don't know what they're gonna really do with Kenneth Murray. He's gonna be linebacker one, I guess. Sure, we'll live with that. But it just feels like they're valuing the sorry, made it stinky on the show. It feels like they're valuing the back end and they're valuing, the defensive line a lot in free agency. And the linebackers are just kind of like, whatever happens, happens. If we can bring Kyzir back, I think that'd be cool. If, then we'll see what they want to do with Murray at that point. But I just don't think they're going to, invest that into Bobby Wagner. I would guess that that's much more likely the Rams at this point. But if Bobby Wagner wants to come here, then yeah, you can let Kyzir White walk and then send Kenneth Murray to the CFL for a 7th round pick. I don't care.
Yeah, a lot of people were, when the whole Calvin Ridley came down, I saw a lot of Chargers fans being like, hey, Kenneth Murray was doing this too, which was a good joke on Twitter. But I like I've been saying, I think Brandon Staley wants to play more dime package. I think he wants to get more defensive backs, more speed onto the field. And like Derwin James playing as a dime linebacker, like I think that is going to be super fun to watch. Of course, you probably always have one linebacker on the field, but Daniel Popper did point out with me that the Chargers still really believe in him. Like they think that he still has, some valuable traits left, and they think that they can develop him. So, if that's their priority this offseason, I wouldn't be surprised. I would expect them to add some competition for Eamon Ogbongbemiga and Nick Neiman at some point. But I mean, we were all really excited about the possibilities heading into last season of Kenneth Murray and Drew Tranquill. So, unfortunately, Tranquill hasn't been able to stay on the field, and Murray kind of has taken a big step back in his development. But, I think that's probably what happens is you run those 4 back, then you draft, somebody in like the 5th, 6th round to provide some competition.
Yeah, that's like classic Telesco there. And I was going through the number of draft picks that they have kept on new deals, and I was at some point I just got stunned when I realized that only 2 players on day 2 or day 3 have been kept by Tom Telesco on a new deal. It's just like it's crazy. So everything just points to like Bobby Wagner, no, and Kyzir White, no. I just think, like you said, they'll find a 4th round, 5th round linebacker that has a great RAS score and just make him the competition.
Yeah, even for as top heavy as we talk about how this team is all the time, you remember that Tom Telesco's like never re-signed any picks after day 1, and you're like, oh, it makes sense why this team is as top heavy as it is. We do have a super chat from Christian Hernandez who says, Hicks or Cox, who do you like better? I like Hicks better because I can't say that I can't say I like him better, so I'll say that I like Hicks better.
Just say Fletcher, man.
I like Fletcher. I like Fletcher. I like Fletcher more as a player because I'm a homer, but I do think Hicks is probably the smarter move.
I would also lean Akeem Hicks as well, but I would not mind Fletcher Cox either, but I would lean Akeem Hicks.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think Akeem Hicks, there's too much smoke there based off of what we know, and I think he is a really productive player. If you missed the film breakdown that Tyler and Gavino did on Akeem Hicks, please go check that out. It's very worthwhile, especially if they do sign him like we think they're going to. So Tyler's point kind of leads me to where I want to go next here, which is kind of predicting and laying out how we think this is going to go. And I want to start with some of the Chargers' own free agents. So thank you guys for the super chats, Frank and Torch LTK. We'll get to those in a second. So in terms of the Chargers' own free agents, Tyler, I think we'll start with you here because you kind of got some confirmation over the weekend of how things are expected to go here. So obviously we've talked about Kyzir White. You don't necessarily have to go there, but Justin Jones is obviously an interesting one to me. And then it doesn't seem like Uchenna Nwosu is going to be back. I think that was kind of out the door once they traded for Khalil Mack. And then still, like, when Uchenna tweeted out business is business, I saw everybody was like, why are we keeping Uchenna Nwosu? What the hell is Tom Telesco doing? It's like, we traded for Khalil Mack, guys. Like, I like Uchenna Nwosu, but like, no, who cares? Like, I'll take Khalil Mack. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's probably a little ruthless, but
he's going off, but he's right though.
Yeah, I like it's Khalil Mack. Like you just don't have space for a JC Jackson and also bringing back a very expensive edge rusher as to be the Khalil Mack's backup. So
Mhm.
But I want to focus specifically on Justin Jones, Scott Questenberry, Justin Jackson, these guys who are other free agents, Steven Anderson, of course, and kind of focus in on who we think is back or not. So let's start with Justin Jones. Tyler, where do you think that kind of ends up happening?
If we get back to Kyzir, I'll sort of explain why there, but I do think Justin Jones is now the likely favorite. Like to me, now I do think he's back. He's back as your rotational, like he's your Christian Covington, I guess, if you want to call it that. Like I think, and that'd be fantastic. Like he hasn't shown the ability to stay on the field, but he's definitely a good player, high upside player. They did draft him, so I think that him coming back on a 1 year deal is about where they're going to go, and I think obviously of Nwosu White and Nwosu's not back. So of those three, I wouldn't have guessed it, but I guess Justin Jones to me is the best chance of being back.
Yeah, I mean, I think Justin Jones makes a lot of sense to come back at this point. I hope for my own sake that he's back. I can't imagine the Chargers without him, without the best Justin on the team. But I do think it'll be interesting. I don't know if he's like a top priority for them, and they're probably going to go after other DTs first, either like an Akeem Hicks, like we've been talking about, or Eddie Goldman, or whatever else they want to do in free agency in the market. So to me, that might be a question that's like answered on like day 3 or 4 of free agency after they figure everything else out. I also don't think Justin Jones is going to have like the hottest market per se.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, I do think he'll be back probably on like a 1 or 2 year kind of deal. But yeah, I don't think he's necessarily top priority for them. So I don't feel super confident either way. That one could go either way.
Yeah, I feel kind of iffy about it. Daniel Popper has kind of said from the get-go that he thinks Jones is back just because they don't really have any other options. He doesn't have a ton of faith in Braden Fajoko or Joe Gaziano, but I mean, the latter one, I don't either. But, I think right now the defensive depth chart is Jerry Tillery. So, bringing Justin Jones back on a cheap deal, I think makes a lot of sense. I do expect them to kind of let him see kind of where he's at around the league in terms of his market. And then, if he doesn't get an offer from the Indianapolis Colts, then maybe he gets back. I don't know. So that's an interesting one as well. I think the two that are most interesting to me, of course, are Ode Abushi and Steven Anderson in terms of the Chargers' internal free agents. I happen to think that both of those players will be back. We heard from Ode Abushi that he wants to stick around in Los Angeles. He wants to continue being a Charger. And I think there's a feeling of just like unfinished business between the two parties because he only played the 4 and a quarter games for the Chargers, and the 4 games that he played were outstanding. Like if you've been if you follow Brandon Thorne, you've seen him kind of post some film clips of Ode's season, and like I think it was to the point where he could have had a better season than Matt Filer. Like as crazy as that sounds, Ode was just playing at an outstanding level. So I think that Ode and Steven Anderson will be back. Like Tyler was saying last year, I don't think, or like he was saying about last year, I don't think that would happen until later on in the week. But I do think that Ode and Steven Anderson at least will be back.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. They just seem like why would you replace them with something potentially down? Like who's going to develop into Steven Anderson's role so quickly as a veteran who's already in the role, who is so good at it? I think is probably one of the best in the league at his specific role. Like, why would you replace that? And then you found that article with Joe Lombardi just raved about Steven Anderson, that he's an irreplaceable player in their offense. And that's true. Like nobody else on the roster really can do what Steven Anderson did last season, at least not yet. And Trey McKitty just seems like he's an inline tight end there. And yeah, Ode Abuji, when we asked him on the show, he was sort of taking the whole interview seriously. Then we asked him, you could just see him kind of like get all happy and chuckle a bit and like, there's been good communicate. Like he wants to be back. There's no reason to not bring him back. Brendan Hymus is not a starter to them just yet. So I think bringing Ode Abuji back at least for one more season is a no-brainer, slam dunk.
Yeah, I think that both Ibushi and Anderson are back. And in a way, not that this world for the Chargers, but I guess Ibushi getting hurt instead of getting that big contract potentially somewhere else after, a really great season kind of worked in the Chargers' favor a little bit. So I think he'll be back on a 1 year kind of deal, probably similar to what he signed last year. Maybe they give him a slight pay bump and go 1 year, $3 million or something like that. I think he was on like 1 year, 1.5 last year, something like that.
Yeah, he signed for the vet minimum last year.
Yeah, so I think maybe they give him a little bit of a pay bump there. And then, yeah, Anderson is kind of one of those that I think could go either way, but I do ultimately think they'll just tender him to keep him on the roster as well. And then if, down the road you draft a tight end or say they sign a Zach Ertz or whatever, you can kind of deal with that when it comes, but he has a pretty cheap value anyway. And if you do want to replace him eventually, you could cut him during training camp or something.
Yeah, and Gabe Neighbors, I think they kind of expressed really how they feel about him when they pivoted and handed that role to Steven Anderson. So
Yeah,
I don't think that's necessarily going to be somebody who sticks around this year.
right.
Would have loved to have that roster flexibility last season and not have 5 tight ends essentially, but it is what it is. Okay, what do we make about the specialists? Because there hasn't been a ton of smoke. Tai Long has not officially been tendered yet, as opposed to Donald Parham and Jalen Guyton, who were tendered. Haven't gotten anything about Tai Long, who needs to be tendered, or Storm Norton. I know that he showed up on one of the cap websites, but there's been no reporting on Storm Norton or Tai Long. So specifically about the specialist, Alex, where do you land on Dustin Hopkins being back, Andre Roberts being back, and Tai Long, who, again, we haven't heard anything about yet?
Yeah, I'll say Hopkins and Tai Long are back. I don't think there's much standing in the way. I guess Hopkins could theoretically sign a contract with a new team, but I think the Chargers bring him back. And then, yeah, with Tai Long, they're going to give him a competition this year and, probably work him off the roster. But that's, again, one of those post-training camp things that they'll eventually figure out probably after the preseason in terms of who their punter is. So we'll see what happens there. Andre Roberts is the one where I think it gets pretty dicey because I do think some teams will have some serious interest in him, another Pro Bowl season for him as a returner. And so I could just see a team wanting to overpay him, maybe more than the Chargers are. And we already talked about the connections to somebody like Cordell Patterson, even though that's probably looking like less and less of an option for the Chargers as they decide to, spend all this money on the defense. That is still a possibility. And so I think the Chargers have other offensive options they could probably go to before Andre Roberts. So that one I think is a little bit less decisive.
Yeah, I think Dustin Hopkins seems to be the lock, and the Chargers try to carry their kickers from year to year if they can, even if they bring in competition and then somebody wins and they cut them later. I think they'll bring back Hopkins. Roberts, like you said, even just when it comes down to the money, do they maybe they have to make a cut somewhere, and they have to. I mean, it would not surprise me if they wanted to find a way to get their 4th running back that they drafted on the field to give him some value and to be like, hey, look, he's worth something, like a KJ Hill, if you will. So I could see them going, you know what, Roundtree, you can do it, buddy. I believe in you. I'm just gonna keep talking about Roundtree to break Alex. See if he smashes his glasses on the screen. So I could see that, but like I believe Ficken said, like he wants to work with these guys, he wants them back. So I believe Roberts and holy crap, Hopkins are back. Long, if he's back, it's not for long. If he's back, great, ha ha ha. If he's back, he'll be around for after the draft, and then they'll probably get rid of him. So
Didn't I just make that same joke like 3 episodes ago?
You did. It's like Star Wars. Like everything's just a poem or whatever. So
everything's just a poem or whatever.
Whatever George Lucas said, everything rhymes.
Yeah, I do think Hopkins is back. Like Tyler's saying, like even Michael Badgley got a chance to return and have some competition. So I think that one happens. I'm a little unsure about Andre Roberts as well. I think you can find a good returner in the draft. Ficken has shown the ability to develop a guy like that into a big role. So we'll see there. Any other of the Chargers internal free agents that you guys think are back? Any Scott Quessenberry love out there?
Yeah, I think so. That would be like, why would you want to spend a 5th on a guy where you could just bring him back for the vet minimum and he's a good backup? Like that would be a surprising change if they didn't bring him back.
I think all of those guys, after you get past like Justin Jones, really are probably just going to be back on the roster because, no team's like, oh man, I could make Scott Quessenberry my starting center, right? So like he would be a backup everywhere else too. So it's not like he's competing for a role in that sense. So it's not very expensive to bring him back, cheap depth, and good backup to Corey Linsley. So I think that's just how it's going to go really for all of those guys. I don't expect any of them to really go except potentially Roberts, like we've talked about.
Yeah, I can't imagine many teams out there trying to make Scott Quessenberry their starter. Maybe he wants to go to Miami to follow Frank Smith or something like that, but no, I can't really see any of that. So we've gotten a ton of questions, both today and previously, about Brian Bulaga. I promise you guys, he is going to get cut. Like, it does not make any sense for the Chargers to keep him whatsoever. Especially, if he is on the roster next year, they have to pay him $13 million, which is like good. That's like good offensive tackle money. And he's played 12 games in the last 2 years, if that. So the reasoning here is that they do not have to rush this. They do not have to make anything official up until Wednesday is when they have to get under the cap. Every team has to get under the cap by Wednesday. Obviously, the Chargers are already there, but they don't have to make this official by Wednesday. I assume they're probably like encouraging him to retire. But Brian Bulaga is not going to be on the roster next year. There is a roster bonus for him. I believe it's like March 15th or something, or not March 15th, March 30th, where he's due, I think it's like $3.5 million as a bonus. And that would count against the cap, obviously. So there's just no reasoning for them keeping him. It doesn't make any sense to do that. He is going to get cut, and free up $10.75 million in doing so.
Agreed.
Yeah, I feel like, I think the Chargers have always kind of taken it to the wire in these decisions too.
Yeah.
I mean, not that they're really like thinking hard about it, but they waited till the last minute to cut Hayward last year, when we kind of all knew that was coming. And then previously it was Thomas Davis and Brandon Mebane the year that they pursued Brady a couple of years back. So that was like the day before they wanted to try to get Brady. But, so that's, they're going to wait till the last minute. But $11 million is $11 million. I have no concern that he would potentially be back.
Yeah, I think like we were saying earlier, the next domino to fall is the cornerback position, and then they'll kind of see where things are at. We didn't talk about the La'el Collins thing. Again, I'd be pretty surprised there because La'el Collins definitely will require a significant trade compensation for the Dallas Cowboys because he's really freaking good right tackle, still very young. But I think once we get some clarity on the cornerback position where that's at, like Tyler seems to think that it is JC Jackson, then we'll go from there. And I expect Brian Bulaga to be cut by Tuesday at the latest.
Not that he's all that much cheaper when he's cut, but Schefter does seem to think that Dallas could release Collins if he's not traded. But then that'll be a bidding war for a very good right tackle. So you're gonna so it's gonna be expensive regardless.
Yeah, La'el Collins would instantly become the best right tackle option available, and probably the best offensive tackle besides Teron Armstead. So if Dallas does cut La'el Collins, he's going for 18 million plus, like easily 18 million plus, because he is so good. There just aren't any good right tackles. It's like the drop off between Collins and Morgan Moses or Riley Reif is like ginormous.
Yeah. I just think it's also one of those situations too, where there's going to be teams that are more desperate than the Chargers. Like for the most part, the Chargers have fixed 4 out of the 5 spots on their offensive line, in this last year and a half. So to me, even though Norton's there still currently, depending on whether they tender him or not, or he's still currently projected for that right tackle spot, I do think they'll ultimately end up signing somebody or taking someone in the draft, whatever it might be. But I just think there's too many teams that are desperate for that offensive line help. Like, I don't see how the Bengals, for example, wouldn't outbid the Chargers for La'el Collins if he's cut. Like, that to me just makes too much sense.
No, like if I were a team like that, like the Bengals or like the Dolphins, that was just like clearly desperate for more quality offensive linemen, like I'm trading for Collins. I'm not waiting for him to hit the market. Like I'm trading for him and saving myself, $8 to $9 million a year. So I think that's where that's at. We'll see kind of how that plays out. Yumney had a question. There was a report I saw about the Chargers potentially passing on a defensive tackle and going offensive guard in the draft. I'll save that one and we'll talk about that down the road because I do think it's an interesting strategy. I mean, I tweeted out a mock draft on Friday night with Kenyon Green as the first round pick, just to kind of, get a feel for like different avenues that they could explore. But we'll save that discussion for another time because we want to focus in on free agency. So
who was the report from? Or like
I
site?
forget. Huh?
Well, or like what site?
His name is Mike Farrell. Mike Farrell. He's
He asked for the site.
No, either way, I just don't know.
it was Twitter. He works for rivals.com apparently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
More
He's
credible than Fansided's Matt Lombardo, probably.
Ouch! I didn't say it.
Yeah, I said it. Come on, you can't tweet that bullshit and then they sign Khalil Mack. All right, you're done. You're done after that.
We did get this one earlier from Frank Blakely. I want to make sure we get to it because Frank's a big supporter. Each person give their first choice for CB1: Jackson, Ward, Nelson, or 17th pick.
Jackson out of that list. I mean, I think it makes too much sense for the Chargers to pursue him at this point. I wouldn't mind Charvarius Ward. That'd be very good too, based on his age and kind of where he can go to in his game. But this defense really needs a CB1 for it to function the way that Brandon Staley wants it. I do like the corners in this draft, but I don't think you're going to get that impact guy year one when the Chargers are in this contending window in a Andrew Booth or Trent McDuffie, right now. And to me, Steven Nelson, I like him, but he's not a CB1 at this point. And so, yeah, out of those options, kind of has to be Jackson, in my opinion.
Depends. Like, yeah, Jackson is going to be more the CB1, but I like Ward as a CB1D or something. Like, maybe not an upper tier like CB1, but like
CB 1.75.
I did the math. It checks out. Okay, Alex. I just think if their intention is to win everything this year, and it sort of is, but I think it's over 3 different years. I would just kind of still want to add more players, and I think Ward as a consolation prize would still be my preference. But if it's JC Jackson, like, that's fine by me.
Yeah, I think JC Jackson is clearly the best one right now. I do think, however, that Charvarius Ward, in terms of roster building, like, I think that would be my choice because I don't think he's going to cost the kind of money that JC does, and then you can get, some more quality players. And I think Ward still has some developing left in him. I still think that you can get some high end play from him, but JC Jackson is absolutely the best one there. So, all right, let's get into some external free agents. This has been a little bit longer than I would have expected already. So, I want you guys, we'll each pick 3 players that we think the Chargers are going to sign. You can include JC Jackson there if you want. But specifically 3 players that you think the Chargers are going to come away with next week. Who wants to start?
I'll go.
Okay.
Alex
Tyler
can go.
No, Tyler can go. Okay,
Tyler, you go ahead.
Okay. If I had to guess between the 2 defensive tackles, I'll go with Akeem Hicks. I think that just makes a little bit too much sense at this point. But if it's Sebastian Joseph today, obviously that's fine. I'm going to go with Kyle Rudolph as another one. I don't think if I'm going to find a random player, like, and try to do something different, I do think Kyle Rudolph, with the connections to the coaching staff, their need for a veteran tight end, a guy who's like a middling tight end right now in terms of yak or yards after the catch, per reception. I think they could go that route. I think Telesco wants to add some sort of veteran guy, so I wouldn't rule him out. And then it would just not surprise me if Eddie Goldman joined the Chargers. Again, these are, wow, what names? Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Kyle Rudolph. But to me, like, Eddie Goldman was so bad last year in terms of run stop rate. Like, if you look at the Chargers and the Bears and you line up all the defensive tackles, he was last among guys who actually played significant snaps, right behind Jerry Tillery.
That's quite an endorsement.
What an endorsement. But, Eric Banks, what did he have in the preseason? Like, 0 pressures, 2 tackles, and they cut everyone for him. Because why? Brandon Staley wants to bring in his guys or guys he's familiar with. So I think Eddie Goldman coming in is definitely a possibility.
Yeah. If I had to list 3 free agents, this is tough because I don't really feel super confident in any of them, but all right, I'll take the bullet. I'll go with JC Jackson. I do think it happens. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but it does really feel like they do need that CB1. It could also be Charvarius Ward, and I wouldn't mind that either, but it feels like there's a little too much smoke. And like Tyler said earlier in the show, it just feels like it's more decisive this time in terms of what's out there. And then I'll go with Eddie Goldman as well. I do think they could go after Hicks or Goldman. I think Eddie Goldman would be kind of like the slightly cheaper option probably between those two. So they might save a little bit there, then, go through the draft or then pick up a Sebastian Joseph Day as opposed to an Akeem Hicks, depending on which one's kind of cheaper between those two. And then for my third one, I will go with another white tight end, but I will go with Zach Ertz. I do think that it kind of ends up happening. Right. He's got a little bit more left in the tank than Kyle Rudolph, who, I don't know what he has left in the tank at this point. But I do think they were, invested in him potentially last year to acquire him before they ended up signing Jared Cook and going in that direction. So there is a little bit of familiarity there. And I just feel like if there's one offensive position the Chargers are willing to spend on in free agency, and there's not many after re-signing Mike Williams, it's probably tight end, and I'll go Ertz.
Yeah, Zach Ertz would be a fantastic signing, honestly. I know a lot of people are kind of out on him, but I do think he would be obviously a little bit more expensive, and that's okay. Like, I think they have the space to do it. Shout out to Tyler's mom. Always appreciate the super stickers. I'm not going to predict that he's going to sign, but I want to ask you guys really quickly. Nick Cothrell on our interview mentioned Eric Ebron as a sleeper tight end name to keep an eye on. That was quick.
Nope. Drops. It's just Jared Cook again. He's just bigger Jared Cook. It would be the same thing. I'm not doing it again.
Fair enough.
I don't know yet. Let me see what he did.
Ebron didn't have a great 2021 because he was behind Freiermuth. Like they signed him in 2020. I feel like he was okay in 2020. But last year he was behind Freiermuth, so he didn't really get much of anything.
But it's the same problem. Like
he was on the Steelers with Surratt.
Maybe.
I mean, offensive line coaches work with tight ends, man.
Like, no, totally. I just don't know how much like Surratt's
gonna. We could talk about the offense he was in and all that, but however many years ago, God gave him those hands, and it's been a problem ever since.
He was drafted to Detroit when Lombardi was there.
There you go. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Nice.
I can't do it.
I'm pretty sure do I have him on the composite rankings? I'm curious where the hell he clocked in.
I don't think I did. I think he's a void year, so I don't know if he's technically a free agent yet, but he's going to be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't have him on here yet.
Everyone is sleeping on Cordero Patterson. Not on this show. We love Cordero Patterson. It's just that
Tyler mentions Cordero Patterson every show. Like,
it's my Utah.
None of us. Yeah. It's his Utah. It's his Sixers. He mentions it every show.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to give my predictions here. I'm going to stay away from the cornerbacks because I feel like that's kind of a layup at this point. I feel like Akeem Hicks also a layup. So my prediction is going to start with Morgan Moses. That's somebody that I think makes way too much sense. It really is the most reliable and dependable option at right tackle that the Chargers have available to them. All due respect, I don't really want to see what Dennis Kelly looks like as a starter. I don't really want to draft a Bernard Raymond at 17 because that's really, where you'd have to take him, obviously, because you don't have a second round pick. So Morgan Moses to me makes a lot of sense. He played with Shane Day in Washington when Shane Day was an offensive line assistant there. He has a ton of scheme familiarity. And I do think he's a quality stopgap option. Somebody like Arjun has said, played a ton of games, very durable. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So second one for me, I'm going to say that they figure out a way to get Hicks and Sebastian Joseph Day. I think Joseph Day is a no-brainer to me in terms of a run-stuffing nose tackle. Was on pace for a career season this past season before he got hurt and before Greg Gaines really kind of supplanted him over the stretch while Day was hurt. So I think Moses and Sebastian Joseph Day are two ones that make a lot of sense. And then my third one is going to be a running back. And I think my third one here, I've been conflicted on this a little bit because he does have some injury history, but the Chargers are going to have to go bargain bin shopping at some point. And I think when you get to that point, you want to sign players with at least starting level capabilities. So my third one, I'm going to go with Marlon Mack, the running back from the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously had the Achilles injury and then was replaced by Jonathan Taylor. But once you get past like James Conner, Chase Edmonds, Cordell Patterson, I think there's really just a bunch of hot garbage on the free agency market. And last time we saw Marlon Mack be healthy, he was a 1,000-yard rusher. I don't think I have to remind anybody what he did against the Chargers in 2019. So it's really risky in terms of his health, but I'd rather see what you have in Marlon Mack than do another running back year with Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree. So those are my three. I'm going with Morgan Moses, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Marlon Mack.
Yeah, I like Marlon Mack. I mean, I don't remember the last time Tom Telesco brought over a former Colts player, but that used to be his MO. 8th in yards after contact average, 9th in breakaway percentage, and number 1 in drop rate. But I'm assuming that it's either 0 drop passes or 1 among the free agent running backs. So that's not bad. I can see that.
Y Newman really quickly with a super chat. Any chance we get both Gilmore and JC Jackson?
No.
0. Yeah, it's
-1.
PFF has Gilmore at a pretty low number, but I feel like he is like the second most established and probably high-end corner, even at his age. So I think Gilmore is going to get at least a good-sized bag. Maybe not as much as Jackson, but he's going to get a bag. Yes, Joseph Day did get injured. He tore his pectoral muscle, like in game 6 or 7. But I mean, he's the youngest defensive tackle of everybody that we're talking about, has the Staley connection. So I think that makes a lot of sense. All right. So we have gone over our time limit than we usually do. We are going to go live tomorrow night as well for the first night of free agency. We'll hopefully have some signings to discuss. And then, of course, we'll do Wednesday's episode as well, where we're still thinking about potentially doing Tuesday. Will not be 9 a.m. tomorrow. A couple of us do have to go to work. It'll be tomorrow evening, but we'll let you guys know specifically what time. So, Alex, any final thoughts before we head out for the rest of the day?
No final thoughts. I'm not going to say anything else that gets me into trouble and gets Brett to put out clips on Twitter.
Nice. All right. I'm going to leave everyone who's here in our chat and watching us and enjoying the show. I'm going to leave you with some sadness. Here we go with Kyzir White. I just want to quickly wrap up this show with a big poop bow. So for those who have been asking, like, why have you been off on Kyzir White? And just recap for the new subs, because we got like 1,000 new subscribers over the last week, new followers and all that. So what we know, Kenneth Murray dominated week 18 snaps. Linebacker is not a priority position in this defense. Telesco has only kept 2 day 2 or day 3 players on a new deal. They want to upgrade to other positions. We know that. And as Daniel Popper pointed out, and as we kind of know, they believe in Murray, Neiman, Tranquil, Ogbongbemiga, yada, yada. I think in February, we had reached out and known that Kyzir White was expected to be a reach to return at this point. The person that we reached out to specifically cited money and Murray being a first rounder. So there are those things. Yesterday, I reached out again to the same person. And again, the same thing. They think that White and Jones are both not back. So there's more about Kyzir White. After all that, I've been waiting a very long time to do it. I reached out to Kyzir White. And if you want to know what he said, here we go. I basically told him, in so many words, I thanked him for his time and, all that sort of stuff. The responses I got were, it's been a pleasure playing for the Chargers. I wished him all the best at his next destination, that I hope that his new contract would set him and his family up. He said, you and me both, man, I haven't even touched the surface yet. Trust me. And then I said, take it easy on the revenge games. And he basically said in so many words, never. So at that point, if I'm getting totally fleeced by this, and somebody's totally lying to me, maybe, but based on all the evidence and the source that we've reached out to, that we've known, and I reached out again, and the fact that I just asked Kyzir White, and he said, been a pleasure. Hope the new destination sets me up. Not going to take it easy on the revenge games. I think it's over, guys. I really think it's over.
Yeah.
Sorry for everyone watching, but there it is. So unfortunately, I do think Kyzir White is gone, and it's a bummer. It's going to be a huge bummer.
It is going to be a huge bummer. I think, this past season for Kyzir White was honestly the best linebacker year that I've seen of any Chargers linebacker in my lifetime. I think maybe that 1 year of Donald Butler would probably be the only other choice. And then, of course, Donald Butler was one of the few extensions that we discussed that the Chargers did work out. Of course, he was drafted before Telesco, but yeah, man, Kyzir White, just the way that his rookie year started and everything that he went through with injuries and playing out of position, and then he finally gets his chance. He's in a better system, and he just like completely shot out of a cannon this year and had a great season. Everything that we're saying checks out, right? Like, the Chargers just cycle through the linebacker position through the draft, and Staley doesn't necessarily value linebackers this much. They have too many other needs. They have depth behind him, whereas at edge, at corner, at defensive tackle, they have no depth, right? Like there's nothing there. So reaching out to Kyzir, I think was the final bow there, and I'm hoping it's not the AFC West, but obviously I hope for nothing but the best for Kyzir. He's been great in our interactions on Twitter, and I always retweeted the clips that I would tweet of him on Twitter as well. So just a really great guy, really great player. Hopefully he has a great season down the road for another.
I mean, he's going to the AFC South, him and Wosu, everyone going to the Colts with Gus Bradley.
I would hate that for Kyzir though, because Gus Bradley doesn't know how to use him. But yeah.
Kyzir, who are the receivers in the AFC South? Let me think through this. He'll be put on whatever the fastest one is.
Brandon Cooks, probably.
Geez, it's really not a great receiver division outside of the Titans, but
no. Yeah, so I don't have any other final thoughts there. I think this is gonna be a great week. I'm really excited to see how this pans out. Apparently there's been some rumors that James Bradbury could be traded later today, so we'll see if that does happen. We might have to do an emergency pod later. But yeah, I think this is going to be a great week for the Chargers. They have a lot of cap space. Brian Bulaga cut will help that and fill a bunch of needs. So really excited about this. We'll see you guys tomorrow at some point. And as always, bolt up.